What's up, everyone? My name is Alan, founder and consultant at For Now Marketing, and welcome to Liquid for Technical Marketers. Today, we're going to talk about new data types, arrays, and objects. These data types are slightly more advanced than the data types we previously discussed, but this video will explain everything you need to know about arrays and objects. Let's get started. Get started with arrays. So very simply put, an array is just a list. It's a list of items of the same data type. So we can have an array that represents a list of things about the user, but whatever that thing is, the first item is a string, then all the rest of the items also have to be a string. So referring back to the basic Braze data types we discussed previously, we can have an array of strings, numbers, or booleans. Let's say in our Braze dashboard, we have a custom attribute that represents a user's favorite sports called favorite sports, favorite underscore sports. And if a user is able to input multiple sports as their favorite, then a great data type to choose for this custom attribute would be an array, since this custom attribute represents a list of the user's favorite sports. Here's what that might look like in Braze. So here we have a custom attribute called favorite sports. This is our array variable, and it is a string array custom attribute with the values basketball, pickleball, and running. Now, we won't talk about how to create arrays using Liquid quite yet, but here's what the data looks like when it's being first created. Don't mind all these extra new lines, extra spaces. I did that just so that we can see more easily. But favorite sports here is the array that we were just looking at. And the square bracket that you see here indicates that we are working with an array data type, and each value is listed in order with a comma separating each value. And because each of the values are strings, that's why they're surrounded by the double quotes. And then, like I mentioned earlier, if the first item is a string, then every item also has to be a string, which is why you see quotes all throughout for all the values. Now, let's talk about how to work with arrays using Liquid. Arrays have what's called an index, which is the location of each item inside the array. So the three values that we saw earlier, basketball, pickleball, and running, all have an index which represent their location inside the array favorite sports. In computer science, we always start counting from 0, and it may be confusing at first because we're so used to counting from 1, but this topic is what the meme from the beginning of the video was referring to. Saying arrays start at 1 is like saying children are born at age 1, to clarify that arrays start at 0. So to use arrays indexes to render each value inside the array, we use square brackets to do this, once again, which is the standard across all languages in computer science, including Liquid. Liquid, it's going to look like favorites underscore sports, followed by the left square bracket, the index number, and close it off with the right square bracket. Let's take a look at what that looks like in Braze. Before we start writing the Liquid, let's just do a quick, simple trick. So I want to find the custom attribute that we saw earlier called favorite sports, plural, and we're going to insert it. And just because the Braze's custom attribute syntax is quite long, we're simply going to create our own variable called assign favorite sports and set it equal to this custom attribute called favorite sports. And we're not changing anything. We're simply working with a simpler variable named favorite sports so that we don't have to keep rewriting this whole thing every single time. But either way, it will work, and I'll actually show us an example of both of those. Now back to arrays, let's write out the data name, favorite sports, followed immediately by the left square bracket, the index number, and then the right square bracket to close it off. And once again, because we're in Liquid and we are rendering this variable, we do need to surround it by double curly quotes on the left and the right. And then once again, let's see what that looks like using custom attribute syntax. So once again, we created a new variable called favorite sports just to keep it simple. This is much simpler to work with than this whole variable. But one thing to note is that the variable name is actually this whole thing. If I put some spaces before and after, this is a little bit easier to distinguish. So then if I were to be using this whole data name, then the square bracket actually starts right here, and then we enter the array index and close it off like this. All right, so let's see what this renders, what this looks like when it's rendered, and we click test. And then in Braze, we can search for the specific user that has this data. So we're going to search for my user based on my user ID. And you will see that the first value of our array, basketball, was rendered, as well as the second value of our array, pickleball, was rendered. Now let's go ahead and list all three. So I'm gonna copy and paste favorite sports, include index number 2. And then let's also see what happens if we try to render items of our array that doesn't exist, like array index 3. So we'll go one more beyond our 3 items. This is looking for the 4th item. And remember, the 3rd index is actually the 4th item because the 0th index right here is our 1st item. And let's click test and see what happens. Go back to searching for my user. And you'll see that simply nothing is rendered for the 4th item. But here we see our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, or our 0th, 1st, and 2nd index item. To summarize, an array can simply be thought of as a list. And to use arrays in Liquid, we need to use the square bracket syntax and reference the specific item's index, which we always start counting from 0. Moving on to objects. So if arrays are lists, then objects are groups. Objects are groups of metadata that describe the parent level main data. And metadata are like children data that live under the parent data, which is the main object data. So let's say we gathered information on the user's favorite shirt from our e-commerce website and stored it under a custom attribute called favorite underscore shirt. In this case, favorite underscore shirt is our parent data, or our main data is how I would describe it. And all these individual sub data is what I would call metadata or children data. In this custom attribute, we not only want to store the name of the item, but maybe the size, color, price, and maybe more. And since we do want to work with a lot of metadata and children data, an object is the best data type to use in this situation. Since we have a bunch of metadata that describes the parent data, which is favorite underscore shirt. And once again, here's what that looks like in Braze. So we're back at our user profile, and under favorite shirt, we're going to click view nested object. And then the metadata or children data that's nested inside this parent data called favorite underscore shirt. You can see all of that on this pop-up. The UI for this is very cool. I think Braze handles object data the best in the marketing automation industry. And here's one very important part to note about how object data is structured. So for every metadata, we have what's called a key and a value. Think of keys as the column header in a spreadsheet. They represent what kind of metadata we're collecting. So no matter what shirt a user favorited on the website, these same keys, name, size, color, and price, will exist for all the items. So in our case, the keys are name, size, color, and price. And once again, these keys exist for every item on our e-commerce website. And if keys are column headers in a spreadsheet, then the value is the actual value inside the cell. It's the value that's specific to the parent data in this object. And these values are what distinguishes one item from another. So together, these are called key value pairs, or also known as KVPs. And KVPs are what make up the structure of the object data. You may have also heard them referred to as dictionaries in some computer science contexts. And once again, the values for our data right here is Bulls t-shirt, medium, red, $15.99, all corresponding to their own respective keys. One last thing about objects before we dive into the liquid. To create object data, we always use a curly bracket to indicate that this data type is an object. So this is what that favorite shirt creation looks like. This is the object, and here you see the curly bracket. And each key is listed in quotes. So each of the keys are listed in quotes, followed by a colon, and then the value is listed. And then each additional metadata or KVP, key value pair, is separated by a comma. So moving on to the next one, we have size, also surrounded in quotes, which has a value, a string value of medium, another comma, color, red, and then another comma, and price. And since price is a number variable, we just don't have the quotes, we just have 15.99. So the value can be any of the basic data types, string, number, and Boolean. So the value may not always be in quotes, but the key will always be in quotes. And although we won't be creating objects in Liquid quite yet, this is good information to know in case you run into objects in other tech scenarios. Back to Liquid, let's go over the Liquid syntax for referencing the object data in Braze. And we use what's called the dot notation. And before we do that, let's do the same thing we did with our favorite sports. So favorite shirt, and we're going to call our custom attribute favorite shirt. And then let's go ahead and change all our variable names to favorite shirt as well. So we start out by writing the name of the variable. And once again, we use what's called dot notation, which is the standard way to access object data across all computer science languages. So you start out by writing the main data name, followed by literally a dot. And then you write out the name of the key that you want. So let's start out with the name. I'm going to add a little bit of context. I'm going to say name of item, colon, and then this is just hard-coded background context. This is where the Liquid actually comes in and displays the dynamic data. And then I'll also write price of item and then also render the price as well, just like that, using dot notation. So when we render this by searching for the user profile again and looking for my specific user that has this data, take a look at that. We saw both Bulls t-shirt and price of item get rendered in our message. So once again, what's happening is Liquid will search for this object data called favorite shirt and then look for the key called name and then render the value that lives under this key called name. And the same thing for the value that lives under the key called price. And when we see the test again, we see, whoops, let me go look for my user. We see the exact values that live under those keys in this data called favorite shirt. One final thing to note is that in objects, the metadata is not sorted in any way. So it's very arbitrary that the name is listed before any other attributes. But if we ingested the data with the price listed first, for example, at the top of our list, separated by the comma, there would be absolutely no impact on how the Liquid is written or how the metadata is referenced. As a reminder, it's a group of data with no specific ordering. So we talked about arrays, which are lists, and we talked about objects, which are groups. And this third type is not a new type, but a combination of the two that we just discussed, which is an array of objects. An array and object is basically just a list of groups. It's a list that contains data groupings or objects. And a perfect example is the data to describe the current items in a user's shopping cart. Back on my user profile, let's take a look at our data called items in cart. And let's click view nested item. And at first glance, this data may look similar to what we saw in our favorite shirt data. So let's look at favorite shirt one more time. So we have, this kind of layout, but in items in cart, the main difference is that there are multiple groupings. So we have this first grouping, which we can actually collapse, and then the second grouping versus our favorite shirt data, which was just a single object, and there was only one group of data. That's the main difference. Items in cart is an array, a list of objects, a group of data. So arrays of objects are pretty much just multiple objects put together in a list, in an ordered list, so you can keep track of multiple groups of data. And in our case, I did end up putting my favorite shirt into the shopping cart, as well as another pair of Lakers shorts that is size large, color white, and the price is $13.99. And let's go over the Liquid syntax one last time, which is going to be a combination of arrays and objects. So a combination of index and dot notation. So for the last time, let's change it out to items in cart. And let's say I want to pull the first item in my cart. So first I need to go inside the array. I need to find the exact index of my item. So I'm going to use the array index notation. And then I'm going to render the name of that item, which is in the 0th index or the first item in that list. So I'm going to do dot name. Once again, it's a liquid variable, so we do need to surround it with curly quotes. And then let's say I wanted the price as well as maybe the color of the first item. So let's say first item name. We're putting some hard coded context, first item price, and then first item color. And then let's actually do the same thing for our second item. So second item name, second item price, second item color. The only thing we need to change is the index number, which the first index will refer to the second item in our list. And that item also has the same object keys, name, price, and color. So let's go ahead and change all of those. Let's take a look at what that looks like under my user up. It looks like it's already reference, but take a look at that. Our array of object data is flawlessly rendered in our message here. That's it for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time.